I make a book at the moment. It's called The New Old, and it basically tries to explore time and explore, say, the amount of oldness that we produce. And so, because we grow as a planet, and you get more and more stuff, and also our collections in the museums become bigger. So, we have the opening of the depot in Rotterdam soon. So there, the new old somehow is a kind of explanation and exploration of this endless flow of oldness that's overcoming us, and what to do with that is what it wants to, and how to produce or reproduce it. So, the case of the Notre Dame, I find it indeed more than amusing that Macron announced this international competition, and the flood of ideas that came out of it. So we photographed all the ideas that were there on the internet and all that to see what are the main ideas of if you could do something with that church, what you would like to do. And that in itself is super interesting, already as kind of idea factory, what people find important of such a kind of, say, tragedy or event that come out of that, what to do with that. There are extreme different opinions. It's almost impossible to choose. So I understood, maybe it was a setup, that's for the discussion, but it ends up with full restoration in a way. I do try to create freedom for myself and I think also I try to relativate always. I know that there are millions of buildings, and I only make one. And I think also when the building is not so loaded as the pyramid, when you make simply a tower, it's a tower. And there are hundreds of towers in that way. That creates immediately also more freedom because of that. It's super important that the building doesn't become only like an execution of the demands, the technical demands. So the building always says something. If you are even neutral, okay, the building expresses neutrality. There, in that space between neutrality and speaking out, there is actually quite some freedom. It's an observation. And I think I used that already from when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, then there was the Club of Rome. So my parents had a black and white television. And I was there playing. And then day and night, there was almost the Club of Rome was saying, all these leaders of the world, that we shouldn't use fossil energy anymore. There's our sources, and they calculated when the sources were begun in all kind of ways. And so there was a very pessimistic message was coming to me. So that has somehow influenced me a lot. So if you say, so that it doesn't come from inside, no, it came from outside, but I internalized it, I think more than I expected. And that because it comes back, I think, in the work a lot. Oh, I think there's a lot to do. I see still there's a kind of incredible poverties in many places. There's a kind of a big fight between the rich and the poor still happening. There is the ecological disaster is gigantic in many places. There is an economy that needs to be balanced and repaired, and so there are big themes out there or around us. Architects cannot solve everything, but they can do a lot. And I must say that many architects don't have that feeling. They make their small stuff, but actually, if you enlarge it, then actually, and you calculate, for instance, the number of buildings that we have to produce the coming time, and if you do it then in a correct way, then I can bring the temperature down of the planet with 1 to 2 degrees. So you can save the planet. Oh, yeah, every day too much, and every night too much. Do I dream less than in what I want to make? No, that has not changed. But I see that, of course, there are this kind of additions in this, in my storyline, in the fact that I've learned a little to be stronger, to be even more aggressive than before, less naive. I see a lot of colleagues and people that are doing it fantastic, and that take pieces of this whole enterprise that we need to do. So I'm actually very happy with that. That is, there are general dreams of like how a city can look like, or what should it be. The big themes are everywhere, I would say. I don't want that Nairobi becomes even bigger these days because in Kenya, because then the traffic becomes a nightmare. So that needs to be solved. So that's that's very generic, I would say, very global. And but yes, then every city composition allows for other kind of suggestions in that, and therefore possible plans. And that brings to me like a reaction. In that way, that feeds at that moment the potential of a project in it. And that's everywhere different. When you're older, and then you don't care. Also, about like I just want to do what I want to do. I only have a couple of 40 years to live or 30 years to live. So I have nothing and more to lose. So it's also kind of freedom in that way. You can also be tougher in that way in negotiations. But yes, you are also more open in opinions. So you can deal with that. And in your naivety of the first years, you don't listen. You just do. Limitations sometimes help to make a jump. That is, and that you therefore do a surprise. Because surprises are very important. No, I try to, of course, to take care of, and I want to avoid that. But I think any building, and also research, need a certain moment of courage to do that. We talk a lot with a client on what is the vulnerable components, and because he has a knowledge, he or she has a knowledge on what is needed. So I accept that also. But there are also things that he or she doesn't know, and that is given to the architect because of his specialism, or that's given to another professionalist. And that is actually the zone where you can experiment, where you can add something. Most of the people are also curious. So we think that many developers are not curious, only interested in money. That's not completely true. I think almost everybody of us, I think there's somewhere in our brains, there's this feeling we should be curious. Because if we're not curious, we're dead. Then it's end of the game, end of life, and no reason to live anymore. So there's curious. It's in everybody, it might be different. But that seed, that zone of curiosity is exactly the point where you can experiment. Where the unknown can take shape. Sometimes I have to take a responsibility, so then I analyze and I do, and I do that direction. And yes, I get criticism, and also because some projects, for instance, are older and they're not completely that green or that ecological as they should be. So my sons are really like they can pinpoint that, and that makes me also, you're not ashamed, but I see that the limitations of my time and of myself in that respect. There's a lot of competition in architecture, so there's a. So on one hand, you want to be better. You want to be also specific. You want to so you have a certain kind of handwriting or approach that you and also in these days that is because of open sourcing and because of the speed of development. Copy paste is everywhere in these days. So it challenges my thinking. It is, by the way, an interesting process to show what you've filtered out and what not. And sometimes you have to filter out for the protection of that experiment. So like the depot building in Rotterdam, not everybody liked that in the very beginning. It was criticized. So how do I position the criticism? So in the case of the depot, there was a criticism from the hospital next door. A professor was there, a psychiatric professor for kids. If this mirror is in front of the kids, they get too much impulses. And so their situation, that could lead to suicidal behavior. Yeah, that is, I took that immediately for serious. So what we did, I calculated any point where these kids could be, in the gardens next door, and on the balconies, and in the rooms that they have. I projected that on the building, and I made a cloud over it. So I made like a material which reduces reflection and mirrorization. So this was a critique and a dialogue. So I tried to turn it into a nuance. The society is complex. It has different directions. It's also good that it has this kind of diversity of opinions, but how to position them, how to bring that together. So that can be by remarks, but also indirectly. I think indirectly is also an interesting zone. My wife is a theater maker, I love that, because it's like you have to explain things. Like you have an hour for a theater piece. It can be very nuanced, but it has to attract. It has to also to turn into a story, which I find a fascinating job. So when she makes something, I can be, ooh, that's really, I mean, that helps me in that way to also to find a nuanced story. I'm now writing a book on issue of time to put that in. And I think the theater making is with their emotion, because of the time that you have, so you have to deal with the passion of the play or of the theater piece. It has to take you. So there's a lot of communication indirectly in playmaking. So that is fascinating. I think that if you can, somehow I copy that, because I do that, or be inspired. I try to turn buildings into a story. I hate it. Because I'm much too curious to see how the world would look like in 100 years. But I also am realistic that it's part of us. So that is. So what does that mean? That I just continue working till I don't believe in the word pension. That's a consequence of that paradox that is there. I'm also aware that I have to do sports, so I have to be healthy, and don't eat so much meat. No meat at all. That's stupid. I'm not a smoker, not a coffee drinker in that way. So it's a kind of that's part of the game. Do I earn more points with that? Maybe. I don't know completely how that is. I think adrenaline is also a very important element. So because that gives me also the move, and somehow that keeps you also alive, both in thinking as in doing, in action. So these are some of the methods to deal with that paradox of the realism and the dream. Am I afraid of that when I would be alive, that I would less be respected or less be asked? Yeah, that's true. And of course, I will not be this glamorous young boy that I maybe was at a certain moment. But to be in touch and to not become sentimental or not to become unnuanced or unopen. That's also because openness is maybe one of the most important parts to survive and to continue. So not to be stuck, not to stick yourself also completely, not to be over stubborn. These are ingredients of that process.